What's a completely normal thing today that would terrify someone from medieval times? Story 1. Telling Alexa to turn on the lights. It would look like casting a spell or calling on a demon to work some dark magic. Story 2. I remember reading an account of Henry Ford taking someone for a ride in an early car he made, and the guy was terrified of the speed. The car was traveled at a top speed of 28 mph. Answer. I think we'd all be terrified riding an open top, no seatbelt, flat bench, seat car with hardly any suspension on narrow tires bouncing along violently on cobble roads made for horse carriages. I suspect cars were terrifying until modern safety norms and were unable to be as unsafe as those Victorian industrial workers were. I can't imagine normalizing the dangers they accepted daily. Story 3. Not sure about terrified, but I think modern attitudes to religion would shock and bewilder them. For many medieval communities, religion played a huge part in everyday life. There's still some areas of the world where they'd feel right at home, of course. But overall, the religious freedom we have and the fact that some people just don't consider religion important would seem very strange to them, I think. Story 4. Walking down the street just a couple of feet away from enormous metal carriages hurtling at terrifying speeds. Story 5. Not sure if they're considered normal, but I was thinking horror movies. Even knowing they're not real, I find them too terrifying to watch, so I imagine someone with no concept of film would either be totally petrified or run away screaming. Story 6. Woman speaking their mind, not being religious, traveling outside of your neighborhood, drinking water. Answer. Drinking water. Most people drank water throughout human history. The whole "we only drank beer up until recently" thing is somewhat overplayed. In places with unsafe water, sure, low adult beverage beer was a safe alternative, but even then, in those places, you could collect rainwater for drinking. I don't think any human in all of history that lived to adulthood would have thought that drinking water was unheard of or scary by itself. They'd just be aware that you have to be sure the water is safe to drink. Story 7. Someone posited that if Julius Caesar came from 44 BC to 1799 and met George Washington, he would be able to adjust quickly. Horses were the mode of transportation, communication was by voice, light was by fire, etc., and the advances in technology were understandable for the most part. But if his time machine was off by 100 years and he came in at 1899, it would be almost an alien world. Cars and trains replacing horses, electricity replacing fire, etc. Even more so in 1999. And what will we think in 2099? Story 8. The sound of the subway. Well, some subways anyway. The Athens one is quite modern, but it's fudge loud. Story 9. I think an underrated one people aren't thinking of is guns. Modern guns that can fire off 15 rounds a second, each one that puts a foot-wide hole in someone, with a sound so loud it can give you permanent hearing damage. That would terrify a medieval person. They had cannons and hand cannons, but the firearm tech was laughable compared to what it is today. Story 10. A medieval serf would work 4 to 5 hours a day, maybe 150 days out of the year. There would be intense times like planting and harvest, for example, but there were tons of days off. Religious holidays, festivals, etc. Our work-life balance would be absolutely shocking to an indentured slave from the Dark Ages. Edit. Obviously, this doesn't include regular domestic labor. I wasn't aware I would need to make that clear. I'm speaking about work, not life. Answer. Regular people worked sunrise to sunset 6 days a week, therefore a bit of a break in winter. There were a few festivals where they could attend. If you chose not to work, you were a vagrant and arrested. I just happened to be reading and studying world history, reading at least 1,000 pages of information about it all, just between 1200 to 1600 AD, 1,000 pages. Laws, wages, taxes, wars, kings, popes, morals, religions, manners, etc. Story 11. Electricity, my phone, TV, the internet, my appliances, all witchcraft. The women might appreciate how I'm just as educated as men, and how I have machines that do laundry in less than 2 hours, rather than the 4 days it took back then, between spot treating and soaking, washing sometimes by bashing with paddles, wringing out on poles in public squares, drying, ironing, sometimes wish starch, etc. Story 12. Isle of Man TT. The Isle of Man is basically closed to traffic, and motorcyclists show up and go really fast on open roads and through a town. Whoops, sorry. You asked for normal things. Isle of Man TT is not normal. I would say airplanes, airports. Possibly seeing meat openly displayed in a grocery store. Story 13. Guns. Imagine seeing someone point a long stick at you, hearing a loud bang, then being hit without the person touching you. You can't see the bullet, so all you would know is there's a hole in you and you're bleeding. Story 14. They would probably be astonished at how lit up our cities are at night and the effects of light pollution on the night sky, as well as almost everything else, of course. Story 15. Swimming. Most medieval individuals basically looked at still water and getting into it as a fudge-passing sentence. Robert the Lion-Hearted was renowned for being a swimmer, and everyone thought he was insane for it. Story 16. Sleeping through the entire night. In the medieval periods, it was common to sleep sundown to around midnight-ish, get up, do choirs or prepare next day's food or pot, then sleep again about 3-4 until sunup. That was their natural rhythm back then. They would be weirded out. We sleep completely through the night. As weird as that sounds. Story 17. Reading a book silently that didn't used to be a thing until relatively recently. Before, everyone would just read out loud. Story 18. I mean, if we're intentionally trying to terrify them, then probably a roller coaster or traveling on an American highway or the German Autobahn or, flight. Story 19. Skyscrapers. They fudge me up from looking up at them from the street, when the best you've seen is your 2-story church in your village that will dumbfound you. Story 20. Scare them. Any form of travel that goes over 40 minutes. Amaze them. Modern cooking. Microwaves, toasters, non-stick pans, ovens, air fryers, crock pots. And then the tools. Oh my gee. Story 21. Construction equipment, the massive machines that chew up and spit out huge quantities of building materials per day. Story 22. A helicopter. They'd be unable to down it. They'd have to wait for it to run out of gas, and that's if they don't run away first. Pretty sure they made an anime about this concept. Story 23. Shoot. I remember reading a post somewhere saying akin to, if someone from the 1960s appeared in front of you, how would you blow their mind? This small device that fits in my pocket and not much bigger than a cookie allows me to speak with anyone in the world that also has one, gives me access to the sum total of the world's knowledge, can translate most written languages with a good degree of accuracy, but we use to bait and argue with total strangers and watch cat videos. Story 24. Probably airplanes and helicopters. Cars would look strange, but they can get the concept of a wagon or cart that moves down a road. But any form of flight would likely freak them out. Story 25. Watching an A-10 Warthog light up a column of vehicles, or maybe an AH-64 attack helicopter. Either way, they'd be calling those things dragons. Story 26. Planes, trains, and automobiles, pictures, video, wireless communication, skyscrapers, today's roads, modern mining, laundry machines, glass and mirrors, refrigerators that dispense water and ice, all works of the devil. Story 27. A monster truck, a helicopter, a fixed-wing aircraft, an amphibious landing craft, a submarine, a battleship, a tank, a rocket, modern firearms, a modern flashlight, a chainsaw, a scuba diver, a person in a wingsuit, a parachutist, all kinds of stuff. Story 28. Everything, I'm not sure there is any part of this world that is the same. Even our world now is considerably different from when I was growing up, and am only 37. The year 480. 1400. Please. Story 29. Can you imagine the amount of explaining you would have to do to get a medieval peasant to understand what a smartphone is, how it works, including how it's powered, and how you're capable of seeing and talking to people across the world in real time? Which accusations would fly long before you'd get anywhere? Story 30. A metal bird flying overhead at hundreds of miles per hour, full of people casually sipping soda 10,000 meters in the air. They'd either think it's a dragon or that the end times have arrived. Story 31. Have a watch of the Navigator, 1998. My separate guess is that most of the people you see are unknown to you and you will never see again. Very little spirituality or superficiality. Story 32. Highway travel. Air travel, a locomotive. Your average concert. A heavy metal concert would convince them the end times had come. Drinking any energy drink. Never having consumed caffeine or any other CNS stimulant, the energy rush would likely cause a panic attack, convinced that they'd been poisoned. Story 33. The constant noise. There is constant noise in just about any modern neighborhood. The sound of a distant lawnmower starting up or airplane passing would freak them the fudge out. Story 34. Probably something to do with how long we can keep meat. A medieval person probably couldn't fathom keeping chicken dead for 7 days and still eating it. Story 35. Women. We are out here doing whatever the fudge we feel like, with the credit rating and cash to do it. Half the planet is free from patriarchal and religious slavery. It's still new too, so it's spring break out here. Piercings, tattoos, colored hair. LOL. Story 36. Science. They had a religious answer to everything, and the fact that everyone can read would probably blow their minds as well. Story 37. Movies, television, internet, anime, manga. Anime would make WCI Japan jaws drop, so imagine what would happen to the medieval people if they saw all these 5. Story 38. That we have the ability to eradicate, prevent diseases that disfigured and eliminate people during their time, but are too fudge stupid to do it. Other than technology, we would probably have a hard time convincing them that we were from the future. Story 39. When someone falls over or gets injured and an ambulance pulls up, lights and sirens running, and then the EMTs pull out their various gadgets and proceed to save the person's life. Completely normal today. Story 40. Electricity. Even when it was introduced in the late 1800s, people thought it was some kind of weird magic. A device that just lights up when you flip a switch? Witchcraft. Story 41. We made wafers out of sand and put lightning in them, and it lets us talk to each other anywhere on Earth, like we're standing next to each other. Story 42. The fact people don't talk to each other. Back then, you would know everyone in your town village, so you would probably speak to everyone you see, especially since villages and towns had populations in the hundreds, so it would be like being in a medium-sized school. Story 43. A flip phone. Not a normal thing today, but it shows that even older tech would be incomprehensible to a medieval person. Story 44. Planes, I imagine how loud they are would be terrifying to them. Even worse, with jet planes and artillery, no protection can save them from a bullet shot through an helmet. Story 45. I think genuinely if they knew this was the future, or from the future, they could understand very easily as long as you explain properly. Story 46. Smartphones, TV, aircraft, race cars, LED facial masks, laciers, escalators, holograms, fake boobs. The list is endless. Story 47. Cars, telephone, electricity, automatic weapons, computers, kitchen appliances. What wouldn't be terrifying? Story 48. The speeds we can move at, the size of things we've created, our ability to fly, moving pictures. The fact those moving pictures exist in our hands, speakers, recorded sound. Pretty much everything we have would be powerful witchcraft to then. Story 49. I imagine everything is just louder now. It would probably be overwhelming how much background noise there is. The hum of an air conditioner, the sound of traffic, a distant train blast, the tinny sound from someone else's headphones. It's just never-ending. Even in the dead of night, there's man-made sounds unless you're deep in the boonies. Modern language would be initially terrifying. Could you imagine being dropped off in a new world and virtually incapable of basic conversation? And I don't mean skibbity toilet nonsense. The Middle Ages is pre-Great Vowel Shift in English and German. Probably other languages too. Story 50. A passing metal concert. The insane loudness, the volume, the sound ramming in your guts would absolutely terrify a medieval person. Story 51. There are 37.4 million people in one city in Asia. I once lived in a very small town of 6,000 people. Technology could all be attributed to sorcery and alchemy. There's something of a frame of reference for believing that people could fly through at least supernatural means. But the biggest threat, totally incomprehensible and terrifying to the medieval person, is the sheer size of our population. Medieval people depended on knowing the people they lived around, personally. They didn't encounter a ton of strangers, and where they did, those strangers had better have a darn good reason for traveling. They were looked at with incredible suspicion. A stranger could be a bandit, or could carry disease, or try to get the town in trouble with the Lord. Every stranger had to be carefully vetted. If they didn't pass the test, maybe their Latin wasn't what they expected of a cleric, for example, or they didn't speak the right local dialect, they'd be turned away from lodgings and taverns. We mostly live around thousands, even millions of strangers. Yes, those strangers include bandits and criminals, and they carry disease, and they have very different political opinions, and we just accept it. Well, let anyone stay in a hotel as long as they pay. That's terrifying and unhinged to a medieval person. Story 52. They didn't have projectors, so you could mount one on a drone and project video of CGI monsters and shoot on the side of the biggest building in their feudal city. Story 53. Canned whipped cream. I think the compressed air, conveniently chilled dairy, and generous amounts of sugar and vanilla flavoring would fudge them up, while at it, ice cream. I might just be hungry. Story 54. Cell phones, even just pictures, photos. I think a common misconception is that everyone knew what kings, queens, or even themselves looked like, but unless you physically met them, you likely had no clue, and the common folk didn't have access to many reflective surfaces. If you took a picture of someone and showed it to them, they'd probably freak out since they've never seen themselves before, at least in any detail. Story 55. Large events like eclipses, earthquakes, hurricanes, obviously, but also the effective ability to destroy life. Story 56. I am standing in a natural area a few miles from the city. I remove a small, somewhat shiny object from my pocket. The face of the object lights up gently and has pictures that change. That by itself is pretty crazy. I poke the face of the object. The picture on the face changes. I poke more, then return the object to my pocket. A few minutes later, a metal carriage arrives. A stranger hands me a cardboard box with a pizza and a few bottles of water made from a strangely soft form of glass. Lunchtime. Story 57. I imagine, depending on their cultural priming, they would lose their shoot over anything more technologically advanced than a voice call, or just find it super cool and want to use it. Story 58. X-ray, CT scan, mammogram, basically any type of medical imaging. The machines themselves are still scary to many people today. Then you show someone what their insides look like. They're done. Story 59. The YouTube channel where everything is in super slow motion. Car on fire, exploding, in slow motion. Alt suggestion. Video from the scene where Dumbo gets tipsy and trips balls. What's an elephant? Hold on, buddy, you're in for a ride. Story 60. A lot of things, but I've always thought that riding in a car at 75 mph would be terrifying for them. Story 61. A lot of answers seem like they would scare but not terrify. I think a bullet train close up might actually make someone shoot their pants, lolo. Story 62. When the movie theater has drinks that are sized M, L, and XL, and they would probably freak out that we have medium without the small, and we would have to explain that whole thing to them. Story 63. Fucking everything, lolol. Showing them video of themselves or getting them into a plane immediately spring to mind, though. Story 64. City driving. A galloping horse doesn't get over 30 kilometers. City speed limits are 50 kilometers with variations. Freeway driving would be even worse. Story 65. Flush toilets with toilet paper. What I just poop in that device inside the house and a stream appears and carries it away. Oh, and this thing you call paper is much softer on my butt than the leaves and sticks I usually use. Story 66. I've wondered what would happen if I brought a boombox back to medieval times, and LaJohn Cusack hold it up and play some Ozzy or Metallica. Probably burn me as a witch. Story 67. Throwing your children out of the house as early as possible because the bird needs to leave the nest at some point. That's just not really how it was done. Families would strive together and work together. Leaving home permanently is somewhat modern. Story 68. A 50-something person with all their teeth. No visible sores or deformities. 3 or 4 inches taller than the average person, 15-20 pounds heavier, and who appears to be in their late 30s. Story 69. You take a dump inside your house, press a button, and it disappears. No smell, no rats, no disease. That's wizardry. Most of them were tossing waste out the window and hoping no one got hit. Story 70. Medieval times is a span of basically 10 centuries. The fall of Rome to the Renaissance. A box with words coming out of it, a radio iPod, would do it at any point in those times. Story 71. An important clarification. Am I to assume I am traveling back to them, or are some of them traveling forward to us? If they're traveling to us, phones would be wild, but if we traveled back in time, they wouldn't do much. No electricity, no internet, no cell service. Also, if one of us showed up back then, we would likely be eliminated by a superstitious mob. If one or a handful of them traveled forward in time, we'd have a better time with all of that. Story 72. Alcoholic Baja Blast from the Vegas Strip. VSCO girls and their noises might get them accused of some crimes. Story 73. Medieval battles were mostly fought as pitched battles, shield wall versus shield wall, essentially a shoving match between two sides, each armed with big shields and sharp swords that would continue until one wall broke and ran. One modern soldier with a machine gun would destroy a single wall. Imagine if you showed that to Alfred the Great. He'd probably get a stomachache and have to lie down just thinking about it. Story 74. Literally anything motorized and man-made that can fly. I was thinking just man-made, then I realized kites are old as fudge. Story 75. Going 120 on a highway when the fastest you could imagine going back then is less than half that on a galloping horse. Story 76. The fact that POC and women have as much power autonomy as they do, and probably the prevalence of jerk to mouth. Story 77. Cars, drivers, eliminate 1.4 million people a year, making cities noisy, spreading pollution everywhere. They would think we were insane. They'd be right. Story 78. Not knowing all the intimate details of the lives of the people who live by you. The person who lived right next door, often with just a wall between you and them being an utter stranger, maybe not even knowing their name. Story 79. Probably germ theory would be my guess. If explained and proved well, it's the kind of thing that would really mess with someone from that time period. Like, if you could prove that the plague spread by rats and fleas, not vapors. Bonus, if you can bring some penicillin along for the ride. Story 80. No one's mentioned feminism yet. The Middle Ages was an intensely barbarically sexist time to be alive. Story 81. Guns. Just one squad from pretty much any military doing a demo would blow their minds and terrify them beyond repair. Story 82. Ha 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 ha. Pretty much everything. Someone from the early 1900s would be scared to shoot or to passing by all the cars, noise, computers, and screens. Someone from 500 AD, their brain wouldn't even be able to comprehend most of our world. Or maybe it would be like Bill Ted's Excellent Adventure, LOL. Story 83. Photo manipulation and special effects. You could show them fantastical things and they'd probably just believe it. Story 84. Watching a heavy-lift helicopter taking off close up. That's right, the swords are swinging so fast it flies. Grabs their tunic and pulls them close so they can hear over the roaring downdraft. Do you feel the power? Story 85. Being able to communicate instantaneously with someone on the other side of the world where it is nighttime. Story 86. If they saw the string bikinis that my sister let my 12 and 13-year-old nieces wear to the pool, they would be as gobsmacked as I was today. Story 87. Things in our pockets or on our wrists speaking to us. They would have thought it was demons or witches.